This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Jordan Gebhardt, K-State Swine Nutrition veterinarian, and Larissa Becker, K-State Animal Sciences and Industry PhD student, begin the show by explaining the work they have done to better understand calcium and phosphorus needs in swine nutrition. K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner keeps the show going by discussing bull management in the winter. He explains what cattle producers should keep in mind. Rounding out today's show is K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, Gregg Eyestone, as he talks about winter care for houseplants and offers tips for keeping live Christmas trees healthy through the holidays. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show discussing why calcium and phosphorus is important in swine nutrition. And to talk about it, we're joined by K-State Swine Nutrition veterinarian Jordan Gebhardt and Animal Sciences and Industry PhD student at K-State, Larissa Becker. Jordan, Larissa, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yep, thank you.
Jordan, I mentioned that calcium and phosphorus is really important for swine nutrition, and why is that?
Absolutely. So calcium and phosphorus are two macro minerals that are very important to consider in all biological systems, particularly in swine production. Calcium and phosphorus are two minerals that are used for a variety of biological purposes, growth and development, and one of those very important components being skeletal mineralization. Those two minerals really form the backbone of our bones and really dictate structural soundness and how well those animals grow and develop, but also move long term. So making sure that we feed an appropriate level of calcium and phosphorus to make sure that we optimize bone mineralization is really important. But on the flip side, more is not always better. Phosphorus, for example, is one of the more expensive nutrients that we feed in swine diets. So making sure that we provide sufficient phosphorus to meet our goals and our needs, but also not providing excess phosphorus such that that material then goes into the environment and has some environmental concerns, but also the economic implications of that as well. So really dialing in the complex relationship between calcium and phosphorus is very important in swine nutrition and swine production.
And Larissa, you looked at that some working on your project as it involves calcium and phosphorus.
Yeah, and so as part of my PhD program, I did a project diving into the literature to understand calcium and phosphorus requirements in reproducing sows. And so we broke it down and looked at specifically gestation and lactation. And for gestation, the sow really needs these minerals for her own skeletal development, but then also to grow and develop these fetuses throughout her gestation length. And so that calcium and phosphorus requirement increases throughout gestation to provide for that growing litter of pigs. And younger sows and older sows have very similar calcium and phosphorus requirements just due to that growing litter that she is growing throughout gestation. And then in lactation, these minerals are used for milk production and to feed these growing piglets. And that requirement in lactation is a little bit higher than it is during gestation, just to meet the milk demands of those piglets.
And as you were looking into this, what were some challenges you were seeing when you were looking through all of that literature?
So our goal was to understand why we feed the levels that we feed today in the industry. And what we actually found is that there's not a lot of literature out there. There were only 9 published studies for gestation and only 7 published studies in lactation. And so there's a huge need for more research specifically on calcium and phosphorus levels in gestation and lactation.
So for those levels, when we're just looking at gestation, kind of what are you seeing for producers?
For producers in the industry, what we're typically feeding right now is a little bit higher than what this published data says. And I think that's just because of over time we've applied a margin of safety to these feeding levels just to make sure that she's able to grow those bones, but we really don't understand what she actually needs.
And so what about on the gestation side? Similar story?
Yep, it's very similar for gestation and lactation. There's a lot of gray area that we just don't understand as much. And there has been some recent literature and research conducted in this area, but a big challenge for research in gestation and lactation on calcium and phosphorus is that we really need to measure that bone mineralization, which means collecting these bones from sows, and that's can be a big limitation for this type of research.
So as we're thinking about this, Jordan, how do producers maybe need to catch that or see, oh, I have something wrong for my swine?
Absolutely. So for the most part, with most feeding levels, we won't notice any significant abnormalities as it relates to calcium and phosphorus. If we make big formulation errors or make big feed mixing errors and don't add these minerals to the diet, over time we can see problems. We can see reductions in structural soundness or lameness. Or if it gets really bad and we're feeding deficient levels for a long enough period of time, we can also see broken bones. And that can be both in younger pigs, nursery pigs, but also pigs going to the processing plant. If we see an increase in the number of broken bones, we definitely need to be thinking about our calcium and phosphorus requirements and where we have those levels set. But also, is what we think we are formulating on paper, is that what is actually getting in front of the animal? As always, in any aspect of nutrition, that's very important to consider as well. So a lot of the levels that Larissa's mentioning on the sow side, we believe we may be overfeeding, certainly phosphorus by a small margin. We won't see any huge impact on production when we're talking in the range of the scope of what Larissa's talking about within the published literature. But what there could be is some opportunity for some cost savings, but also to more efficiently utilize that phosphorus for our productive purposes, as opposed to that material then going into the manure and then being applied to the fields. So a lot to learn still in this area, both on the sow side, and really that was one of the biggest limitations that Larissa's project looked at, but we're also trying to learn more and more on the nursery and growing and finishing pig side as well. A lot of research in those areas has been conducted to establish nutrient requirements, establish the relationship between calcium and phosphorus. Those two minerals are not independent of each other. We need to consider both of them together in those discussions, but also how certain enzymes, specifically phytase, can be used to increase the digestibility of phosphorus that's naturally found in our feed ingredients. So a lot of work has been being done over the last number of years related to this calcium and phosphorus area, allowing us to improve how we formulate those diets to meet the pig's productive needs, but also do it as efficiently as possible for the producer.
So while your project maybe wasn't looking at calcium and phosphorus, really taking the time to go through all that data and all those numbers that have already been collected so that it becomes in a consumable amount?
Absolutely. So we've been taking stepping stones towards our improving our understanding, but we certainly have a lot left to learn.
So what would be a few of those things that you're hoping to learn in the future as we move forward?
One of the areas that we have continued to try to improve is our ability to understand the diagnostics associated with bone mineralization. If, from a veterinary perspective, if we go in and investigate at the field level, at a producer level, lameness issues, for example, or if we suspect calcium and phosphorus may be a problem in the diet, what sample do we collect? How do we collect that sample? And when we work with a veterinary diagnostic laboratory, what testing should we do? And how do we interpret the results of those different testing parameters? So that's really an opportunity that we've been pretty excited about, to be able to work with nutritionists, work with veterinarians in the veterinary diagnostic laboratories to improve our understanding of this very complex area. So we hope to take the research that's being generated here at K-State and beyond and be able to compile that and work together to best serve the needs of swine producers, both from the nutrition as well as veterinary medicine perspectives.
And Larissa, as you've spent hours on this, I'm sure working on it and putting in a lot of tedious hours to figure out all those numbers, what do you really want producers to get from it right now?
So what we feed out in the industry is higher than what the published literature says, but again, we really don't know exactly what to feed, and so there's a lot of opportunity for more research in this area. And if you want to learn more about what work we're doing, you can look at the ksuswine.org website. And we just recently had our K-State Swine Day, and so there are some recording of presentations on that website as well.
And are there other resources available from the K-State Swine team?
Absolutely. One of the really good resources for producers, nutritionists, veterinarians wanting an overview of many swine nutrition-related topics, calcium and phosphorus being one of those, we have our KSU Swine Nutrition Guide resource. It is written in relatively straightforward and easy-to-understand terminology, and that also is found on the www.ksuswine.org website.
Jordan, Larissa, I appreciate you both taking the time to join me today and share with us why calcium and phosphorus is really important for swine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was Kansas State University swine nutrition veterinarian Jordan Gebhardt, and he was joined by animal sciences and industry PhD student at K-State, Larissa Becker. Larissa presented on this topic at K-State's 2023 Swine Day. If you'd like to listen to that presentation, you can do so by going to ksuswine.org and clicking on Swine Day presentations. Her presentation is titled Sow CA and P Review, Larissa Becker. You can also find it on YouTube. Also on that ksuswine.org website, you can find the Swine Nutrition Guide. The Swine Nutrition Guide is to serve as a reference for understanding swine nutrition principles and to provide the current recommendations and practices regarding applied nutrition to the swine industry. I will link the Swine Nutrition Guide and Larissa's presentation in today's show notes on agtoday.net. And just as a reminder, on agtoday.net, you can find the previous shows if you've missed one and would like to catch up. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be joined by K-State Research and Extension horticulture agent from Riley County, Gregg Eyestone. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Thursday show discussing bull management going into winter. And to talk about it, we're joined by K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner. Jason, thanks for joining us today.
Shelby, thanks for the opportunity to be on. Appreciate it, as always.
Jason, first talking about kind of the bulls that are entering for fall breeding and maybe things that we need to think about for them.
You know, this is always a good time of year to be really assessing and thinking about what you're doing from a bull management standpoint, regardless of the time of the year when you calve, but certainly for producers if they're more of a fall calving program and you're going to be starting the breeding season now or maybe even sometime after the first of the year for some producers, depending on when those calves are born. Always doing a breeding soundness exam on bulls as we go into this time of the year is really critical. We often think about it, particularly going into the spring for spring breeding seasons, but going into the fall breeding season is really important as well, too. It's always recommended to try to do that at least 30 days to maybe 45 days prior to when you're going to introduce bulls into a set of cows for breeding, just to make sure that you've got enough time in the event if you've got bulls that don't pass a breeding soundness exam or they're not recommended for breeding. You've got ample time there to make adjustments, find a replacement bull, or potentially recheck that bull if that bull doesn't pass an initial exam. So just some important things to keep in mind if folks are going to be introducing bulls for breeding here for fall calving herds going forward.
And sometimes this time of year, really producers are just keeping their bulls alive and making sure they're cared for, but what are maybe a few things feeding-wise they really need to keep in mind?
One thing that can often happen with producers is that bulls, especially after the breeding season is over with, we get into late summer, early fall, we pull those bulls from cow herds often, and bulls can become the easiest animal on the operation to forget about during that time period until we need them again next spring, right? And so it's easy to turn those bulls into a bull pasture, manage them separately, but then it's pretty easy to forget about them at times. And so we want to make sure that we're doing some simple things that are important but easily overlooked to just make sure that we're maintaining those bulls at a proper weight and body condition score going through the winter. It's always important to be thinking about those bulls from a body condition score standpoint, just like what we do on cows. It's the same 1 to 9 system that we have that we can apply to bulls to assess where they are from an energy reserve standpoint. And that's critical because we know that wintertime, the stress of winter and cold temperatures and cold stress, and we want to make sure that we're maintaining those bulls at a proper body condition as we go through the winter time period to allow those bulls to be at a better condition going into spring. And if we can maintain those bulls at a better body condition, we can avoid having to supplement them a higher level as we get closer into the start of the breeding season. So some things that we want to keep in mind there would really just suggest doing some strategic supplementation, evaluate where those bulls are from a body condition standpoint to make appropriate recommendation there.
And something really important to bulls are their testicles. And so what might we want to think about when it's cold outside for them?
Well, the big thing that we're always concerned about when we have severe cold stress and particularly time periods where we've got a lot of ice and frozen ground is frostbite and the potential negative impact that can have on semen quality. And we routinely will see that every year in the early spring as we're coming out of wintertime. And we know that we've got issues, or we can often see issues with bulls. And it's just really important to be thinking about providing some bedding for those bulls and also some wind protection. And so depending on what the management situation is, how those bulls are maintained, particularly if it's maybe a smaller trap pasture or a dry lot area that doesn't have a lot of residual forage cover on that surface of the ground, if bulls are going to be maintained in areas where we've got a lot of bare ground, we really want to be thinking about making sure that we're providing ample bedding, particularly when we get into real extreme situations where we've got lots of cold temperature, lots of wind stress, just to make sure that we're protecting those bulls. Because if it's severe enough, it can certainly negatively impact their ability to pass a breeding soundness exam, and so we want to make sure that we're thinking about those things as well.
Jason, you mentioned how testicular frostbite can be pretty severe. So is it something that they're going to recover from or more likely have permanent damage?
Depending on the degree of severity with it, it can lead to some bulls, permanent damage on some bulls from the standpoint of spermatogenesis is negatively impacted to the point where they cannot pass a breeding soundness exam. So it just depends on the degree of severity with that potential condition.
And if producers are thinking about developing yearling bulls, what are a few things they might want to take into account, especially if they're planning on selling them next year?
So this is a good time of year for seed stock producers if they're developing bulls for a spring sale. And so when we think about a lot of bulls are marketed, really from January through early April in a lot of situations. And so when we think about developing those bulls at this time of year, now is just a really good time period to really be assessing where those bulls are from a weight and a performance standpoint, making sure that we're developing them at a rate that is going to allow them to express their genetic potential for growth and performance. We want to make sure that we're developing those bulls properly so that they're in acceptable condition, acceptable body weight for most bull buyers. But at the same time, too, we want to avoid over-conditioning those bulls. And so I think it's important as we get into this time of year, if you're maybe 60 to maybe 90 days away from when your anticipated sale is, be doing some check weights on bulls. That's a good opportunity to assess where they are. And then if you need to make any adjustments to your feeding program or your ration program for those bulls, you've got ample time to do that. We want to avoid, getting into a situation where we're behind on those bulls and we need to make up a lot of time and make up a lot of ground in a short amount of time from a weight standpoint. And so we don't want to have to really gain those bulls at a really high level going into the production sale and the potential breeding season. And so, being a little bit more strategic and understand where those bulls are farther out can certainly be beneficial for us later on.
And Jason, so as we think about the winter and maybe staying cooler for longer periods of time, what are those key points that you really want cattle producers to keep in mind?
I think just some big things related to bull management is we want to make sure that we're focusing on where those bulls are from a weight and a body condition score standpoint. Understand that young bulls, those bulls that are 3 to 4 years of age, they've still got a requirement for growth just like what females do. And so they're going to be continuing to grow and develop. We want to make sure that we're providing enough supplemental energy depending on what the forage quality is. Keep in mind that for a lot of situations, we may need to supplement bulls anywhere from 0.5 0.3 up to 0.5% of body weight on a dry matter basis of a protein or energy supplement in addition to what their forage intake will be. And so for a lot of bulls, we might be looking at somewhere between 6 to 7 pounds a head a day of a supplement in order to maintain weight and energy. Provide adequate bunk space. The thing that you want to keep in mind with bulls, if you're commingling older and younger bulls together after the breeding season, make sure we're providing plenty of bunk space there, usually 2 to 3 feet of linear bunk space per head, just to make sure that we've got plenty of space there so that those younger, more timid bulls that are maybe a little bit lower on the totem pole, so to speak, have plenty of opportunity to get the supplement and the feed that they need, so we can maintain weight and condition on them. Because the challenge is bulls are going to be bulls, that they're always going to fight and work on establishing that hierarchy. And so if we can make sure that we're providing enough space, you may have to think about supplementing those bulls in a separate area of the pasture or larger trap area, just to make sure that those younger bulls can get their fair share. So just some important things to keep in mind with management in general.
Where can people find out more information about this?
We've got additional resources, of course, on ksubbeef.org. Of course, contact your local extension agent or area beef specialist.
And also wanting to let people know about an upcoming production clinic, the Cow-Calf Production Clinic on December 14th.
Yeah, I just want to make sure folks are aware of a cow-calf production clinic that we have coming up, as you said, on Thursday, December 14th. It'll be in Washington, Kansas. And really the main objective with that program is to really focus primarily on risk management from the standpoint of both economic as well as production risks that we see within the cow-calf sector. And so really just a great opportunity for folks to learn more about the various tools and management options that are available from a risk management standpoint. And so there's plenty of time to learn more information about that program and register. And there's additional information available on ksubbeef.org for details with that meeting and how to register. And there'll be additional meetings, cow-calf production meetings with a similar focus will be scheduled in various locations throughout Kansas after the first of the year, with more details to follow after the first of the year on those scheduled meetings.
Jason, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some information about bull management going into winter.
Shelby, appreciate the opportunity as always. Thanks for having me.
That was Kansas State University Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner. If you'd like to read more on this topic, you can do so by reading the article Supplementation Considerations for Bulls Following Breeding. You can find it on ksubbeef.org, or I will also link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. Also in today's show notes will be a registration link to that cow-calf production clinic that is taking place Thursday, December 14th in Washington, Kansas. It is titled Navigating Opportunities and Risk, Production and Forage Considerations. The program will kick off at 10 a.m. and wrap up around 2:30. They do ask that you register for it by December 11th. Cost for attending is $10 that can be paid at the door. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. The most important thing to remember when caring for houseplants over the winter is to check the moisture level before adding more water. K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, Gregg Eyestone, discusses how to care for houseplants, holiday plants, and live Christmas trees. Greg, I imagine you get a lot of questions year after year about houseplant care because there's really a lot of things that go into this, and one of the things we don't want to do is watch that houseplant die.
It is. Once our outdoor activities kind of come to an end, we focus on indoor plants, and maybe we focus on them too much by giving them a little too much water. That's still the number one killer and problems is that you water them too frequently. And so you really just need to check on your plants, see if they need that water before you apply it.
Is that just sticking the finger in the pot?
That's a good way. Another way is, if you don't want to get your finger dirty, is to go ahead and lift the pot up. You kind of have a feeling for what the weight of the pot and the plant is, and if it's fairly easy to lift up, then maybe stick your finger in there and double check, and that would probably be the time to water. If it's a heavy pot, probably still has moisture in there, and the plant's doing just fine.
I'm assuming it depends on what size the pot is, but we really, as you say, don't need a lot of water.
That's right. We're kind of in the dormant period indoors as well as outdoors, and so we're not looking at plants to grow, and so we're not adding fertilizer, we're not adding more moisture. We're just trying to keep them kind of on an even keel till we get into March when there'll be more light energy available for new plant growth. So really just kind of keeping them dormant, and we do that by not overwatering and not fertilizing.
Location is another important factor?
Yeah, as the heat vents rev here in the winter time, you're going to have some drying there. So again, you need to check your plant. This is the time of the year when that issue occurs more. Often maybe the cold draft, whether it's a window or door opening, may be a little bit of a factor, but the main thing is moisture and adding that water. And since we have low light energy, don't try to push your plant to grow.
So we really don't need as much sunlight as we might think?
Well, if you're trying to grow your plant for some particular reason, you're probably going to have some supplemental light necessary to do that. Some people start their seeds indoors and use LEDs or fluorescent lights. So that can occur, but typically that's not what we're trying to do with whether it's our holiday plants or even our indoor foliage plants that we like to have year-round. We're just trying to leave them in their particular location so we can enjoy them but not kill them.
We also see a lot of holiday plants this time of year. Anything we need to know in terms of the poinsettia? Yeah,
so again, they don't really like, really more sensitive maybe to wet soil, and so we really want to check that. It's okay for a plant to maybe wilt a little bit. You can, pick that up as you're walking by and look at it and say, hey, maybe I need to check on that. That's something that the plant can recover from, whereas if we have wet soil and we get root damage, again, the plants aren't growing very much, so they can't repair themselves very well. So overwatering is our big problem. Amaryllis is a popular one, and we usually put that in kind of a really poor soil so that we don't overwater them. Just kind of give us an extra caution there. So again, checking the moisture on that. Christmas cactus or holiday cactus, again, just a little bit of moisture. Going to have to check on that. Use the finger if you need to. Lift the pot up. Just don't overwater.
If you're traveling, I've seen the little globe things. Do they work?
There are different methods of adding moisture, depending on how long you're going to be gone. If you're over for 2 weeks, you may need to have some kind of a supplemental water system. But most plants, once a week is probably ample, at least to check on, and maybe not need watered for a while.
Live Christmas trees are still a thing. Some people still buy the live Christmas tree. Anything we need to think about in terms of maintenance for those?
Yeah, it's keeping the bowl full of water so that plant can take that up so it doesn't dry out too quickly and become a hazard. Those really take up water those first couple days or a week, and then it slows down as those pores start to plug up. But keeping the water bowl full and making sure the pet's not removing that water is something to be concerned with, too.
And as you mentioned, that is a fire hazard, so we do want to make sure that the needles are not drying out.
Yeah, check your needles. If they start to dry out, use your judgment whether you want to recut that stem, which would mean taking all the decorations off and the lights. But it will absorb water again if you cut a couple inches off that bottom trunk if you got to that situation where no water's being taken up.
That's K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, Gregg Eyestone. More information on caring for houseplants is available at Extension offices across Kansas. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.